Welcome to Basic Black. Some of you are joining us on our broadcast, others joining us on Facebook and Twitter. Hello, everybody. I'm Chris Collins, your host. Callie Crossley has the night off. Sports consciousness. We, like you, are dealing with the effects of the coronavirus pandemic and are taking precautions. We are working with a limited staff, and our guests are joining us remotely. Sports in the United States is a multi-billion-dollar business. Many athletes are household names and are held in high regard for their achievements. But throughout the years, athletes, black athletes in particular, have risked their professional careers to address injustices. However, during the time of racial reckoning and the deaths of black men and women across the country during encounters with the police, we're seeing several black and brown sports players speaking out, expressing their outrage and racial and social inequality. Plus, with the upcoming presidential election, some have gone even further and are willing to use their celebrity status to step into politics and embrace activism. Will it affect change, and at what cost? Joining us tonight, Dr. Joseph N. Cooper, the J. Keith Motley Endowed Chair of Sports Leadership and Administration at UMass Boston. Dana Harrell, member of the 1969 Syracuse University football team who spoke out for the better access to educational opportunities and treatment, known as the Syracuse 8. He is also principal of Harrell Associates and an adjunct associate professor at Bentley University. And Ken Shropshire, the Adidas Distinguished Professor of Global Sports and CEO of Global Sports Institute at Arizona State University. Gentlemen, I welcome you all. As we endure a pandemic, and we look at the landscape of sports and the landscape of people of color in sports, let's start with you, Dr. Cooper. How does this affect long-term how people interact with people of color in the sports world and beyond?
I think it has significant implications for long-term relationships between sport organizations and entities and black athletes. We know that in this current era, black athletes have some of the highest earnings and economic power in the history of sports, and the connectivity to not only corporate sponsors, but they also have social media as a tool that allows them to speak out on social justice issues. So I think that the fact that there are multiple sports and multiple athletes using their platforms for social change will have a long-term implication in terms of how the sport industry responds to black athletes' demands for social change.
The game changer for me is because, as you mentioned, Dr. Cooper, and let's move on to you, Dana, because there is so much money at stake and because there is influence when you have money in your pocket, it makes activism a bit different for an athlete in today's society as opposed to, let's say, when Ali or John Carlos and Tommy Smith were doing their thing.
Well, there's no doubt about that, and that in no way diminishes what these young men and women, black and brown, are doing today, stepping up and addressing social justice and racial justice and economic justice issues head on. But there's no doubt the great Muhammad Ali took a stand, courageously took a stand, and he lost 3 years of 3 most valuable years of his career. John Carlos and Tommy Smith couldn't get jobs for 20 years. And admittedly, these athletes, many of them, and again, this is not to diminish their contributions, they've got millions in the bank, some of them. But I think it's telling, and I think it's important that these young men and women still step forward and take a stand, even though they have in their grasp the American dream. And I think they do so because the mamas, the daddies, the brothers, the sisters, and all their friends, they are still dealing with issues, and they are dealing with issues they don't have the economics to get beyond, or they don't have the social status to get beyond. So my hat is off to them many times over.
So, Dana, you risk everything. The Syracuse 8 risks not just your college education, risk being thrown out of college, really risk your financial future. So someone who was willing to take that stand at a time where taking that stand wasn't very popular. What do you see when you see an athlete, let's say Michael Jordan, let's say Tiger Woods, both athletes of color, both billion-dollar corporations, but they haven't been very vocal in the last, especially when they were playing in the primes of their career, they haven't been very vocal when it comes to activism. How does that make someone like you, who was a member of the Syracuse 8, feel?
Well, I don't criticize someone's stance or lack thereof, so long as they're doing something. And Michael Jordan, Michael doesn't know me, I don't know him, so he doesn't care what I think or say. But the point is, he's doing a lot nowadays. But I remember back in the 80s, everybody is not built the same way. And that's why Muhammad Ali is who he is. Or everybody is not built to take a stand and risk everything. And I don't know whether or not, I mean, my position 20 years ago, it's kind of like Kareem's position about the whole thing is, why doesn't he stand up? But now, reflecting and having many years of dealing with folks who are making contributions, but they aren't necessarily frontline warriors, but they're warriors nonetheless, but they're not necessarily frontline. Everybody can't be Jackie Robinson, Muhammad Ali, Arthur Ashe, Jack Johnson, Paul Robeson. Everybody can't be. And the reason you can rattle off their names is because they took a stand and put it all on the line. But that's not to diminish, okay, guys like Michael and Tiger, I don't impugn their motives. And I think that they're doing substantial things now, and that's needed as well.
Well, they certainly have written checks recently, and it's become obviously more popular to write those checks and to get involved as there's been, less backlash. But end of the day, unity and cohesiveness and support for the Black Lives Matter movement, is dwindling. Dana, as we can, when we look at where this is headed, where is this headed? I mean, we're at a position where, the leagues are donating serious money. The NBA, as they should, 80% people of color. The NFL has donated significant and is actually now endorsing, players if they elect to take a knee. But where is this headed? Because there's already been starting to gain momentum as far as backlash. Where do you see this going, Ken?
Well, I do keep thinking that, we've got to move, as we have to some degree, from protest to progress, as Dana set forth. And we've also got to move from symbolism to real action. And one could say setting aside a fund for $200 million, whatever it might be, that in the moment is symbolic. We don't know where the money's gone, and the money has not been spent, and the actions haven't taken place yet. I'd also like to say, let us think big. And I think in some case where we have, to Dana's point as well, you have 22, 23-year-old athletes at the forefront as our spokespeople, which is something to reflect on. Doesn't happen in other cultures, as Malcolm told us so many years ago. Is it the case that they really understand where the real money is? I mean, do we get the deals to head up construction for the new stadiums? Do we get the deals to issue the bonds for the construction of stadiums? Do we get the deals as the big law firms? I mean, that's where the real money is, the accounting firms. And that kind of pressure needs to be there as well. It's going to be nice to have the small business activity and that sort of thing. But for economic empowerment to take place, that goes beyond symbolism, goes beyond the mere expenditure of a fund that essentially, a couple $100 million to a league of 30 teams. That's not a lot per year when each team, has revenues maybe approaching that number in a single year.
And Chris, can I just follow up?
Please.
Because Ken touched on something that's I think it's critical. We, in all of our struggles and challenges going forward, it's two perspectives. What, in quotes, they are willing to do for us, and that much more difficult discussion that we have to have, what are we willing to do? We have to have that internal discussion about how we focus on our future. It's not up to these NFL owners to sustain what we need to evolve as a people in America. I mean, we have, I think, as a community, in addition to multitasking, the young people always tell me, in addition to pressing for owners and other institutions that should rightfully be providing us with more justice and a greater share of America, we still have to look at ourselves and the sustainability of our efforts for social justice and racial justice really starts with us. It doesn't start with white Americans. It starts with us. And just so I'm not, just to be a little clearer, we've got to make a part of our culture voting. We have to make a part of our culture understanding economics. Not going to happen overnight, but it starts with the 7 and 8 year olds and raising them in a culture, for example, where they understand that voting is important. It's a weapon. Oh, there it is. So I just wanted to add that point.
I think we, as people of color in professional sports league that are predominantly of color, I think where the boat is missed is that they don't do enough within their own union. That union is strong, in the NBA or the NFL. Those players' associations have significant power, and if they're not looking and demanding, specific change, it's not going to happen. Now, during the playoffs over the summer, former LA Clippers coach Doc Rivers spoke at a press conference, and he was very emotional regarding Jacob Blake, the shooting. He's now a coach of the Philadelphia 76ers. Doc Rivers, who I consider a friend and one of the great coaches in the NBA, super emotional, super intelligent. Here's what he had to say.
We're the ones getting killed. We're the ones getting shot. We're the ones that we're denied to live in certain communities. We've been hung. We've been shot. And all you do is keep hearing about fear. It's amazing to me why we keep loving this country, and this country does not love us back.
Dr. Cooper, did Doc Rivers hit the nail on the head?
Absolutely. It was very powerful for Doc, especially given his stature in the NBA as a former player, as a championship-winning coach. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, he's part of a biracial family. So I think that even resonates more with individuals across racial backgrounds. Too often, the issue of racial justice has been relegated to the Black community, that this is Black people's problem to fix. And if we look at historically, Black people have been extremely resilient. We've engaged in cooperative economics. We've followed the law. In many cases, we have voted or attempted to vote, but due to whether it be the threat of violence or the manipulation of political systems, we've been denied access. So it's for Doc to use his platform to make it personal. Oftentimes, I've said in my research, for many Black people, we're not treated as human beings until we provide some type of economic value to the system at large. And that's why there's a heightened level of emphasis on athletes and entertainers because of the economic capital that they possess through their skill set. So for Doc to use his humanity, to use his economic capital, to use his public visibility to personalize an issue that's affecting millions of Black Americans across the country was extremely powerful.
That economic capital, the bottom line is the bottom line. I mean, you don't have a voice until you have, the money in the bank account. So you take someone like LeBron James, and I give LeBron James credit. I don't think it takes a lot for someone who's worth, 500, 600 million to write a check. But to get out to the forefront and really say something, kind of be about it, I mean, that to me is what's most impressive about LeBron James. And to me, the separation between, I know, Dana, you talked about, and that's the argument. Well, because, you're a celebrity, you're a sports star, it doesn't mean you have to carry the weight of the burden on the black community on your shoulders. But at what point do you say, it's time to step up?
Well, again, I think black and brown athletes, men and women, they step up not just because they're athletes, but because they are black men and women. And this affects all of us and to some degree. I mean, make no mistake about it. Having a platform like a pro athlete or an entertainer is, you can reach more people, even globally. And obviously to have their economic resources, that's a tremendous advantage. But culturally, everybody has a platform. Every black and brown person has a platform at some level. And that platform has to be worked every day. And so you don't do it as, in my opinion, it's not just because you're an athlete or an entertainer, but you're a black man or a black woman in America. And there are issues that you confront, your family confronts, your community confronts every day. Systemic racism and prejudice and injustice is not going to be dealt with in one fell swoop by athletes or entertainers or ministers. It's going to be everybody in their own sphere stepping up to be a leader on their platform, whether it's, the construction crew boss or whatever. Everybody has a platform.
Ken, we just saw some video of Colin Kaepernick. As someone who hasn't been in the league in 3 years, I think most people will say he belongs in the league. And they asked him to sign a waiver saying that he wouldn't sue the league down the road. And he has sued him and probably will sue him again. What do you make of that situation? Is that something that will ever change? I know, obviously, we are where we are with him. But let's say 10 years down the road, will we still be fighting that same fight where you speak out, you have the ability or the league has the ability to ostracize you and keep you out of it, basically collusion?
Well, look, yeah, that's a great question because it's gone on, in the 400 plus years that we've been here. You think about initially the whole concept of staying in your place, engagement in slavery. As you go through the passage of time, it's become more clandestine as time has gone on. So the idea that we can't pinpoint the collusion that may or may not have occurred against a black man for speaking out, it's just part of the continuum of what we've seen. I mean, I think about, one of the understated moments that Cap is a part of in that pantheon is, and then with Dana here, I think about it, is Jim Brown's retirement from the NFL. Essentially what he said in that moment where his owner demands that he comes back from engaging in his second profession. There was a delay in filming. He essentially said exactly what the protest signs of the day said. When he was demanded to come back, he said, "I am a man. I'm not coming back. I have the right to live my life in the way that you do, Mr. Modell, even though I'm a black man." So there's some powerful steps that have been taken along the way. Curt Flood is another example of just exhibiting manhood that in our 400 years we have not been allowed to do on equal footing with white America. And these athletes have, consciously or not sometimes, have tremendously set forth that equality message that so many don't understand.
Shut up and dribble. Would that ever been said to a white athlete, Ken?
not in that same way. I mean, certainly you can think of the one-on-one with the coach, but the public defaming of these men. You think about it, we can't think of a single moment where that has happened to a prominent white athlete. And the beauty of LeBron, again, is to immediately respond to that, to be a man and to say, I have the right to do this. And the amazing thing about LeBron, which I know all of us think about, is here's a guy with a high school education that took the time, frankly, to educate himself, now 36-year-old man, and to assert himself in that way in the space that he has. And as Dana says, doesn't have to do it, has chosen to do it, but has chosen to do it in an educated and impactful way.
Just a different time. And I keep going back to, how do you equate it to, where Jordan was in his day in the 80s, or where Tiger Woods, where really he was in his prime in the 90s and the early 2000s, to where we are today with LeBron, where he's an activist. He's encouraged by so many, where back in the day, I mean, if you threw something out there, basically you put your helmet on, you hope you wouldn't be, kicked out of the league, and you'd be able to work and provide for your family. So, as we look ahead, Dr. Cooper, are we in a good place? And if we are in a good place, or we're not in a good place, where do we need to take this?
I think when we look at the historical trajectory of what African Americans have experienced in the United States, we definitely are making progress. In terms of defining it as a good place, I think that's difficult to state. I think when we look at the wealth gap in the United States, when we look at health disparities, when we look at mass incarceration, I think it's very difficult for any of us, honestly, to say we're at a good place. But just echoing Dana and Ken's remarks, I think where we are right now, we're in a very unique moment in history where we've got social media, we've got global attention on racial injustice in the United States. And I think that we have to learn from our past and understand the importance of having a multifaceted, multi-pronged approach. Although I support a range, and this echoes what Ken was saying earlier with protests and progress, I support the efforts of various activists, but we also have to think strategically about what's effective. And oftentimes we conflate what draws the most attention to what's the most effective to ignite the change that we need. I would argue, as much criticism as Michael Jordan receives, having ownership of an NBA team and being in a position to hire, being in a position to have conversations with other owners is powerful. We may not define that as activism, but that is a powerful tool of resistance. So I think we have to look at this in a multifaceted, intergenerational struggle. Our jobs in our lifetimes, in concert with our fellow athletes, is to continue to move the ball forward. We have to have economic activism, media activism, legal activism, such as what Maya Moore did, building on the legacy of Oscar Robertson, building on the legacy of Kurt Flood. Right? We have to have collectivism in the way in which we go about these changes so that we're not criticizing each other based on our mode of resistance.
Ken, how do we get into the owner's box? Because we're certainly not there outside of Michael Jordan. Magic Johnson has had parts of professional teams, but outside of those two who have come through, obviously, Hall of Fame, top 5 career players, there's not a whole lot going on. I don't see the NFL ever opening up their doors, certainly not in my lifetime. I mean, that is a closed network where there actually is one, the Jacksonville Jaguars owner is a Middle Eastern guy. But outside of that, there's not much there as far as diversity or any type of color.
No, this is one where you have to face that, what they call the Stockdale paradox. It's a terrible thing, and we got to face reality and try to move forward from there. Our opportunities to become owners occurred at a moment where racism was at its height in terms of the space. When Donald Sterling acquires the Clippers, for example, the team was $13 million. I mean, I don't know any of y'all's wealth, but we could figure a way to get $13 million together today to buy a team. Now a team is $3 to $5 billion. And if you look at the most recent Forbes 400 list, Robert Smith, the richest black man in America, net worth is $5 billion. I don't know a whole lot about economics, but you can't spend all your money on a team. So that's the dismal status that we are in, is that it's part of the larger economic problem, as Dr. Cooper was setting forth, that African Americans have. So there need to be ways to have us in those rooms, unfortunately, even without that title of owner. So it's a hopeful moment, though, when you think about our greater engagement. And this is why I say we need to be in those bigger streams of cash flow. The small business stuff is important. As Dr. Cooper said, the whole continuum of activities need to take place. But we need to have those big money opportunities. And people, if you look at the private equity owners in the NBA, for example, now, they were not in that position. It took a year or two of success to become the billionaires to own those teams. We need to be involved in those opportunities. And as everybody said, we need to find ways to push ourselves into those. So that's what some of the activities should be now, not just the small dollars, but the big dollars, which can open up that ownership space, which right now.
Thank you, Ken. Appreciate it. That's the end of our broadcast. My thanks to all our guests. What a great show. Stay right there as we continue our conversation on Facebook and Twitter. Have a great night, everybody.